Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Diverse reactions have trailed the recent Supreme Court's judgment, which granted full financial autonomy to the local government areas in the country. The judgment, instituted against state governments by the federal government, now empowers direct payment of monthly allocations into the accounts of local government councils, a deviation from the joint account procedure practiced in the past and empowered by the Constitution. News Central's Marvelous Obomanu has more details.
The judgment by the Supreme Court has brought an end to several decades-long controversy over the funding of local government areas, especially in the light of releases from the Federation account. The court ruled that payment by the Federation Allocation Accounts Committee should henceforth be paid directly to local government accounts, a deviation from the previous joint accounts payment as prescribed by the Constitution. While this has been abused in the past by state governors, many say the judgment will make the local governments more effective and empower them to bring development to the grassroots.
Democracy cannot be entrenched in all the 774 local governments in Nigeria. Our people cannot see rapid development. So we just want to thank God Almighty for giving us a president like Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who has had the courage to take this step by coming to the proper place to say, let the proper interpretation be made to give life to the third tier. Enough of the intimidation by forces who do not want democracy to exist in Nigeria.
Their lordships came to a conclusion that money due to local government shall henceforth be paid directly from the Federation account to the 774 local government and 6 municipal council in Abuja.
Today's judgment is historic and iconic judgment that has restored grassroots democracy, which our emperor governors had dampened for the last 25 years.
Counsels to the governors say they will study the judgment and decide on the next course of action. However, others urge the governors to abide by the judgment.
We'll get the certified true copy of the judgment as a body, the body of State Attorneys General of the Federation. We'll study it and then we'll come up with our statement on it.
The judgment also raises concerns on the fate of local development councils created by state governments, especially relating to their funding.
Are there creations of the Constitution? If they are not included in the 774 local government and 6 councils in Abuja.
With local governments now given a free rein to determine the course of development in their areas, citizens have been tasked to be more vigilant and hold them accountable to ensure the proficient management of their funds.
20.6% of federal allocation will be useful in transforming our communities. Other will be needed in the supplement from the states and the federal government. But if we allow the 20.6% federal allocation to go down the drain, as the governors have done, then it will make this judgment meaningless.
The judgment changes the political calculations in many states, as there will be no more excuses for local governments to deny citizens at the grassroots good governance. In Abuja for News Central, Marvelous Obomanu.
It really has been a long road to this point. Yesterday, the Supreme Court gave financial autonomy to the local governments, as we've just seen in that report by Marvelous Obomanu. The court ruled that it is unconstitutional for state governors to control funds allocated to local government administrations, declaring that the 774 local government councils should manage their own funds. In what seems like a subtle reference to a recent development in Rivers State, the court emphasized the need for the separation of powers between the federal, state, and local governments, and stated that the state governments lack the authority to appoint caretaker committees or recognize any local government council that is not democratically elected. noting that democratically elected local governments are essential and non-negotiable. This morning, to discuss this even further, we're joined by the Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Kargbo, and Director Community Engagement of Code, Kingsley Agu. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. So I think I'll begin with Leonard Essien. I don't know if you've been able to get your hand on the certified true copy of the judgment yet. What I would like you to please run us through, what you say are the highlights of this judgment for you, before we then start to ask which side of the divide that either of you are on.
No, the judgment was just yesterday, but I think I have an idea of the course of action and the issues that were canvassed by both parties. When I say both parties, the Attorney General on the one side and the attorneys of the 36 states of the Federation. Here was the case of the Attorney General. The case was that the Supreme Court should interpret the provisions of Section 7 of the Constitution and see whether or not the failure of the states to establish democratically elected does not give the Federation, that is the principal of the Attorney General, the power to withhold funds of local councils that were not or have not been elected democratically. That was the main issue. Although so many other reliefs were asked for, but basically the suspicion of the Attorney Generals of the state was that that was actually the goal, which is to say that the federal government should be given the power to withhold funds of the states where local governments were not democratically elected. When I say funds of the states, funds that are supposed to go to the local councils under Section 162 of the Constitution.
All right.
The average of the states' attorney generals was that the issue, that is the subject matter, was not one that was envisaged by Section 231 of the Constitution, and that the Attorney General had no local standing. That is, assuming there was any dispute at local councils and their respective state, it wasn't the business of the Attorney General to actually litigate that.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so I think you've highlighted and you've captured majority of what the issue was. Of course, the state governors were not having it, even though some were having it. What we're seeing is that there's been diverse reactions. We've seen Governor Fintiri, who said that he threw his full weight behind the local government autonomy. We've also seen a number of other governors who have spoken up against it. And yesterday, after the judgment, former governor of Delta State, Governor James Onanefe-Ibori, spoke strongly against it. We'll get into the details of that later, saying that it takes away from what the definition of or the true picture of federalism is, even though he highlighted that he's not in support of the funds not being administered properly, but if we're looking at the constitutional provision, that it takes away from what federalism is. So I think before we get into details of it, which side of the divide are you on, Leonard Essien? Let's find out what sides my two guests today are on. Are you for it? Are you against it?
Well, I would straight away say that yes, the judgment by itself was pragmatic, and it was only because the Supreme Court was a court of final instance, and that is a constitutional it's a constitutional court and also a policy court. Beyond that, it's a judgment that is difficult to reconcile with the provisions of the Constitution as they are in their dry letters, and also the precedent, that is the previous judgment of the Supreme Court itself regarding its own original jurisdiction as expressed in Section 231 of the 132 of the Constitution. I'm sorry. But like I have said, most of us have agonized.
Leonard Essien, your audio has been disconnected. I'm hoping that we can have that sorted. But whilst we're fixing out your audio, let's bring Sam Kargbo into the conversation. Kingsley Agu, I beg your pardon. Kingsley Agu, you're the community engagement leader of CODE. What would you say your side of the divide is? Are you in support of this? And I'm asking because I know you deal with the grassroots. So let's find out what your side of the divide is before I go into the next question about, what is currently practicable.
Okay, I think it's obvious you would know my side of the divide. Of course, I'm always for the people. The people want more resources that gets down to the grassroots. Local government autonomy, especially when it comes to managing the resources, looks like a system that would deliver that. So, of course, I'm 100% for local government autonomy. All right,
but so talk to us exactly. Now, I knew you were going to be in support of it, but I just wanted, to give you the permission to express your position. But with what we're seeing so far, how would you say that local governments have fared in terms of access to doing the duties, carrying out projects they need to carry? How would you say they have fared in terms of access to funding from the state government?
So no matter how beautiful or lofty the ideas of local government to develop their location or their locality, it all boils down to the amount of resources available to them to be able to carry out that task. And what it means is that you would see little or no presence of the local government when you look at the 774 local government across board. You always see that overlapping functionality between the state and the local government. For example, the Constitution provides that local government should be responsible for the clearing of refuse and also collection of funds as regards that. But what you find in most states is that the state has actually taken over such kind of function. So you want to talk about even collection of rates such as local government radio ground rents or television rates. It's actually the function of local government. But you have the state collecting these funds and with the guys that they will distribute back to the state, which is not always the case. Now let's even talk about is the local government even positioned well to be able to do that? As of June 13th, 2024, Vanguard newspaper puts it as over 58% of states 58% of local government councils do not have elected officials. So what this means is that you have the governor's guys being appointed as caretaker committees, which means that you can't find development that are specific to the people, rather development that are in tune with what the government wants. It's not the first time we're talking about local government autonomy issue. In fact, it started in 2008 when it was first introduced, and then it wasn't successful. President Buhari's government tried to also bring it, wasn't also successful, and now you have the President Tinubu's government being able to get this landmark judgment. And for me, it's a landmark development, and civil society organizations need to rally around the 774 local government immediately to ensure that their fiscal structures are in place, right from budget development to budget implementation, and above all, budget transparency. I want to see inclusiveness in the development and implementation of those budgetary provisions. If you look at the January releases for FAC, looking at the sharing formula of 20.6%, the local government got as much as 278.041 billion naira. That was just in January. If you look at the figures for February, March, May, you see that that's a lot of money. And from January till date, over 1 trillion naira has been shared to the local government.
All right.
Does it look like a location where over 1 trillion naira has been spent? I guess the answer is a big no.
And Kingsley, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you to talk about what the next steps are, especially because there are some who would argue that it's one thing for the local government to get their funds directly, and it's another thing for them to then implement the projects that they've been earmarked for. But let's get back to Leonard Essay, and I'm hoping that the audio is connected. Tolulope Adelere Balogun joins us in this conversation. And Leonard Essay, and I'll have you just react to a statement by the former governor of Delta State who says that is an assault on federalism. He made reference to section 162 of the Constitution, which I am going to read out. In interpreting, he said, section 162 subsection 3 of the 1999 Constitution as amended. He said this section expressly provides thus: any amount standing to the credit of the Federation account shall be distributed among the federal and state governments and the local government councils in each state on such terms and in such manner as may be prescribed by the National Assembly. He provides further, he goes further to talk about section 6, which says each state shall maintain a special account to be called State Joint Local Government Account, into which shall be paid all allocations to the local government councils of the state from the Federation account and the government of the state. So he's saying that the concept of this and the court's ruling is an assault on true federalism, and he's also hoping that the judgment delivered today will be reviewed at the earliest possible time. Leonard Essay, and what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I will start by saying it may not be reviewed. Of course, what he has said is not new. If you read almost all of the briefs and the preliminary objections of the 36 states attorney general, that was exactly what they expressed. But the issue is this: federalism is not just a political issue. It's also an economic and a functional, structural issue. The local government councils, not one, not two, not 10, very many of them had judgments against their respective states concerning this issue of autonomy. And there has been several attempts to amend that particular section that is relying on, that is section 162, especially subsection 3 to 6. But all efforts have always been ending at the state assembly, state houses of assemblies, because every constitutional amendment has to have what? The concurrence of 3/4 of the state houses of assembly. So this particular judgment, like I have said, in terms of policy, in terms of constitutionality as a court of final instance, I would say it is laudable, and if you ask me, it is in tandem with what? Constitutionality and the federal system of government that Nigeria is practicing. There is actually nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with the judgment in that respect. For us as lawyers who are actually precedent-driven, like I have said, we find it difficult to reconcile with the earlier judgment. But the court can always, by itself, sift and modify the Constitution as long as it's doing so proactively to satisfy the sentiment and the inclination of the people.
All right, Mr. Kargbo, thank you so much for that. And I think former governor of Abia State, Orji Uzor Kalu, is one of those who actually has agreed with the Supreme Court judgment. But I want us to move a little bit further. And Kingsley Agu did mention, of course, how much money has come into local governments or was allocated. So in the first 5 months of the year, it's been over 1.6 trillion that has been allocated for local governments in Nigeria. But as he also said, we have so many areas in this country that are not local governments. They are LCDAs. There are situations where there are caretaker committees. And I want to look at the implications of this judgment for that situation as well. So, Mr. Kargbo, I'll start with you. What are the implications when it comes to that? Because you have all these caretaker committees, which means the people do not vote for these individuals who are, quote unquote, caretaking their area. Then we also have the LCDA. Lagos is a prime example. We only have about 20 local governments here, and I think about 33 LCDAs. What are the implications of this judgment on that existing situation as it is?
Well, I would say the devil is in the details. The Supreme Court has made it very clear in the case of Lagos State that DAs are not recognized by the Constitution. So what the case was about the 7 local government councils. Monies will be released to the local government council as they are recognized by the Constitution. For those who have split themselves into some subsectoral delineations, they would have to deal with that. But I do not think that there is any issue that or any reason why we should be bothered with that, because rightly, as the Constitution, as the Supreme Court has said, the Constitution is very clear as to the local government councils that are recognized. They are all spelled out, listed in the Constitution, and for every state, against every state, the Constitution clearly spells out the recognized local government councils.
So Kingsley, I'll follow up with you on that question. So Mr. Kargbo is telling us they're clearly spelled out, but what we know is that the governors in some way or form have been flouting what has been clearly spelled out. So when we look at this in terms of the implications with LCDAs, that's one part I want you to answer. But also second, when we look at elections and the ability of lesser known parties, smaller parties at this point in time to start taking LGAs and not having and being able to run them representing their party, are we looking at a place where this kind of judgment is able to also deepen our democracy because it's allowing more opposition and more competition even for the will of the people, for the vote of the people?
Okay, let me start from the part of the LCDAs. So the Constitution is actually very clear. We have 774 local governments in Nigeria. And states are not at will to create new local government structures. In fact, for you to be able to create local government structures, it's the National Assembly that actually has that right to be able to do that. So if as a state you decide to, as the SAN mentioned, to create a local government, the Constitution did not recognize that. Back to your question on how the states are doing currently in terms of will you have more smaller parties taking over local government elections. So what this judgment has done is that it has given more independence to the local governments. Because if you look at most of the states where local government elections has happened, it's largely parties of the governor that eventually wins those locations. Most of the states. It's just a few states where you find opposition taking 1 or 2 seats in those localities. And if you're looking at that, it means one of the disincentives, or that why people are not so much interested in that local government election, is the fact that at the end of the day, you're just an appendage of the governor. But now with this autonomy coming in, you would have people springing up that would focus on smaller areas like the local government are structured, campaign, get the buy-in of the people and be able to get development. And it's also good for the people of the local government, because what it means is that they know they can now decide their future and be able to vote, get resources for development, and ensure their local government representatives are able to do that. And I think we've talked so much about local government chairman and the rest, but what we're forgetting is that the local government structure also has what we call the councillors. So the councillors are like the lawmakers of the local government. It means even the councillors at the ward level will be strengthened, because you know it's no longer a tea party, because you need to put an eye on the resources that are coming directly to the state. So I think it's a win-win for everyone. And also I know I'm not a legal luminary, but then if my layman knowledge pays me well or works very well, I think the Constitution is a living document, and there's a reason why they call Supreme Court a constitutional court, meaning in instances where they need to step in and interpret the Constitution or take a position on the interpretation of the law, they would have to step in, and that is the reason why they have taken this judgment, and I think it's a landmark judgment.
Speaking of this, okay, go ahead.
Reason why, just one more point,
Okay.
The reason why the federal government in the first place took the state governors to court is because of the misappropriation of that fund.
Yeah.
The Constitution said you would hold that money in trust, but then you're also supposed to transfer the same to the local government. But that is not being done. And that is the reason why the president or the federal government felt there's a need to get these funds directly to the local government, looking at the fact that that so-called joint account has been so much bastardized to the fact that it's just another account that owes the state government funds. That's what it has eventually become. So that's the reason why the federal government had to approach the Supreme Court to be able to interpret the Constitution in the favor of the local government as it is. Right.
We're trying to make the best use of time. So as quickly as possible, please, I'd like you to react to this. The question would be, because there are a number of people who say, yes, whilst this is a landmark judgment and they're in support of it, there are concerns about the administration of these funds released to the local government. Do you have such fears? And how can we ensure that we demand accountability from the local government going forward? And this is for Mr. Kingsley Agu, of course.
Absolutely. I actually expressed that fear. Because if you look at what is already being obtained at the state level, where you have gross misappropriation ongoing, and you can't necessarily match the amount of funds that comes in from the federation account to the states and the development that's on ground, there is a need to worry about the kind of structure that local government would have. But yes, the opportunity here. It's an opportunity for citizens in that locality or residents in that locality to be able to rally around and start putting in structures. For us at Connected Development, we'll continue with our engagement on the Rebuilding Trust campaign, where we are trying to link citizens back to government and ensure that government are as inclusive as possible. It's an opportunity also to be able to set up the fiscal structure of these states, right from their budget office to the implementation office, most importantly, their monitoring and evaluation office. And there's also a need, a double need for the federating unit using its instrument this time around, the EFCC, to now start paying closer attention to these local government funds, and let's see how it goes from here. It's important we state it's not Uhuru as it is right now. It doesn't mean because local government has more funds now that development will happen automatically. No. If we don't put in the right structure administratively, which for us, Connected Development will be on, we started a conversation in Kaduna, we're extending it to across the entire country, we might also face the same issue of lack of development despite funds coming in to the local government.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Sam Kargbo, and of course, the Director of Community Engagement at Code, Kingsley Agu, for joining us on this conversation. It's one that continues to develop, and we'll see more opinions and more probably interest in whichever direction in the coming days as well. But the Supreme Court, the highest court in Nigeria, has decided, and this is what we go forward with. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.